Iran, Japan. You're MC for this session. For years, building a modern web app with Python or other technologies often meant handing the front and over to heavy frameworks and endless APIs. But what if the web could feel simple again? Fast to build, easy to maintain, and still beautifully interactive. That's the vision our speaker brings today. Sheena is not only a seasoned developer but also an educator who has spent years reimagining how we teach coding and empower developers. In this talk, she will show us how tools like HTMX and AlpineJS make front-end development straightforward and joyfully game. Please join me in welcoming Sheena as she presents modern front-end development the simple way.
Right, this is modern front-end development the simple way. So once the web was a very, very simple place and it looked a lot like this. If you wanted to build a modern website, you'd have an architecture that looked like this. You'd have some kind of backend that might just be a file server serving some static files, or you'd have some simple server-side rendering generating some static-ish content, and you'd send that across the wire to a web browser that would just draw the stuff. It wouldn't do anything fancy, it would just do web browser things. But things have become complicated because we had needs. It wasn't really sufficient for the modern web and what we wanted. So Ajax and jQuery were introduced because we needed to be able to get the front end to access information from the back end and re-render bits of the screen. We needed to scale that up to handle more complicated things, and eventually we had Angular, which was a whole front end framework. React ended up overtaking Angular because Angular didn't scale super well in terms of its complexity, and React introduced a whole lot of new things. JavaScript was trying to keep up. I mean, JavaScript is a living language, and so it evolved. But browsers didn't always evolve at the same pace, and so we needed some kind of transpilation stuff going on. All of this required some kind of build pipeline, and so Webpack became a thing. CSS was not keeping pace with what was needed, so Sass and Less were introduced, and it was quite a lot to understand, and so people started building out these component libraries. The web platform itself has been improving. We now have things like Shadow DOM and web components, so the web platform is borrowing from what's been invented in the different frameworks that are being implemented, and it's really a lot. It's a lot to keep in your head. Now, there is a pattern to all of this, and the pattern is that we've had problems, and every time there was a problem, we added a solution. We add more stuff. This isn't a web dev thing. This is a human thing. You have a problem, you add a solution. You have a problem, you add a solution. And sometimes you invent new problems for yourself. But there is another way. So, hello everybody. My name is Sheena, and these are my emojis. I've been coding for a long time, and for the last 6 years I've been working in tech education. So I've done a lot of non-profit work where I took people who had potential and got them into careers. I learned a lot about the science of education, how brains work, and I take that information and I turn it into systems. I have since started my own company called Prelude, where I've taken everything that I've learned about tech education and professional development, and I've distilled that into some products. And I love education, so I've founded a thing called the Guild of Educators. It's a free and open community for people who like to teach code. You can join, it's cool. I chaired PyCon Africa 2025, and I'm one of the directors of the Python Software Foundation. All right, so back to web. So once upon a time, the web looked like this. Now it looks more like this. Looks kind of similar, but not really. So back in the day, we could just serve static files. Now we have to have a backend application because it needs to serve APIs, so it needs to send data structures over the wire. And then instead of the web browser simply displaying what it is given, we need a front-end application that can control the web browser and get it to do what we want. So just to make it a bit more concrete, here is a full stack application. This is a learner management system that I built once. So on the back end, we had Django REST framework for exposing the APIs, and Guardian for making them secure. And on the front end, we have React because it was the flavor of the day, Redux for state management, Saga because we needed side effects, and Material UI because making things pretty and consistent is not my jam. But this sucked. It sucked in many, many different ways. So firstly, our learners were fairly under-resourced, and so they had bad and old devices and bad network connectivity. And so the fact that we were relying so heavily on React and these fancy front-end things meant that their experience wasn't great. And also sucked for the dev team. So if you think about it, like just think about what it takes to build a simple feature. Let's say we have a button, we click the button, it sends an API call, and then when the response comes through, we re-render some part of the front end, we update the front end. In order to get that right, you need to understand all of this stuff in some way. And so, like, for a senior developer to do this, you need to context switch all the time, and that's fine, but it's less than ideal. For more junior people to do this, it was not possible. It was actually bad enough that we were thinking about firing people. So that sucked. And it sucks especially because web development used to be a gateway career. Like, that's how you got into software development. My first ever software development job was out of a magic unicorn, a full stack developer. I used to be a full stack developer. That was my first job. Now they don't really exist anymore, and the ones that do exist are expensive. And this is because front-end web development is really, really complicated. So check this out. This is the front-end developer roadmap. You need to know all this stuff, and that's just like way too much stuff. And so this is bad. It's bad for aspiring devs because that gateway to a career is kind of not really a gateway anymore. And it's bad for companies hiring devs because if you want to build something significant, you have to rely on expensive talent. You can't have there's like this massive pool of junior developers who are hungry, who want to work, and you just can't use them. And it's bad for the future of those companies as well, because where is the future going to come from? Where are the future developers going to come from? So it's bad, and we've been in this weird complexity death spiral for quite some time, and you've got to ask, like, how do we break out of this? How do we do things differently? And how do you do it? Well, you think about things from first principles. So what does the modern web actually need? We need the front end to be able to fetch information from the back end. We need to be able to conditionally re-render parts of the screen. We need the back end sometimes to push information to the front end. Let's say if you've got a chat app and you need notifications, and you need some kind of state management sometimes, like if you want to open and close menus and things like that. So then a question to ask is, can we make HTML good enough? If we're going from first principles, we should look at the foundational technologies and see if they're enough. We can make HTML good enough. So there are two simple tools I want to talk to you about, and that's HTMX and AlpineJS. Foundationally, they are both very small, very simple JavaScript libraries. They work on old, slow, terrible devices that don't take up much bandwidth. They're really small. And they work by adding a few simple attributes to HTML and changing its behavior. So your HTML still works like perfectly normal HTML. It's just got like this extra sprinkling of goodness on top. So what HTMX does is it allows you to fetch partial HTML from the backend. So it lets you say like fetch a button instead of fetch a whole page. Then it lets you conditionally re-render parts of the screen based on what you fetched from the backend. It has WebSocket functionality as well. It doesn't do state management. But this is most of what we need the modern web to be able to do. So let's look at that. This is the hello world of HTMX. So here we've got a button. You click the button and it does a post to this endpoint over here, and then that endpoint responds with a partial, and then that partial, this whole button gets swapped out with that partial. That's pretty simple. This is the hello world. You wouldn't necessarily always want to do something exactly like this, but you can tie HTMX requests to different events. So you can say on load, on scroll, on click, on form submit, whatever. You can use any different type of request. So you can use post, get, put, whatever. You decide the endpoint. You can decide on how you want to use the information that comes back. Maybe you want to swap an element out. Maybe you want to swap another element out. Maybe you want to append something, prepend something, whatever. So it's pretty flexible. Now, look at how simple this code is. There are 5 lines here. It could really be like 1 line. Let's look at what it would take to do this in React. So this is very, very similar code. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but like, look how much there is and look how convoluted it is. Basically, we've got like the button that gets rendered, or if we have the state updated, we render a message. The state is defined up there. When you click the button, it calls this function, does the request over there, updates the state, which causes this to re-render, and like, that's complicated. Compare it to this. This is much, much simpler. All right, so state management is necessary as well. That's where AlpineJS comes in. So Alpine lets you do things like this. You can define a variable, and that variable is defined within a specific scope within this div. And then you can say, when I click this button, then the div, then the variable changes value, and then you can show or hide this content depending on whether open is true or false. So that's kind of cool, and that's kind of simple. So this completes what we need the modern web to be able to do. So in my story, we restacked, we rebuilt our front end using these tools. My developer experience boosted dramatically. Our same team members were adding more value because everybody's developer experience was better. But something that was really powerful was that everybody became a full stack dev. Our most unproductive junior, the person who was most in danger of getting fired, was suddenly valuable. Our code quality improved as well. So it wasn't just about the people, it was also about like the product was better. It was small, it was simple, it was easy to test, we could work faster, it was robust, there were less bugs. We didn't lose any functionality along the way. People look at these simple tools and they're like, but can it do what we need? It could do what we needed, but that's not all. It's really, really useful beyond individual products. So organizations that have been struggling to hire junior web devs to get work done, like that talent pool is now available. It's larger, it's cheaper, it's available. For the junior devs themselves, this is a career gateway. They get to like get a job and actually grow. And it's also worth mentioning LLMs. LLMs do better with these kinds of technologies. Small, simple code takes up fewer tokens. If the code is simple to understand, and there are powerful abstractions, and you don't need to like write out this much code to make a button work, less can go wrong. And so there's less chance of bugs and nastiness. So it's great, and I hope I have convinced you that you might want to get started. So how do you get started? I'll share a link to these slides, but these are links. Here is a post with a bunch of different HTMX inspiration, so you can see what people are doing and what people are capable of with these tools. I made a Django project that you can clone. It's a template starter project with an emphasis on front-end development. And I do training in this stuff. I do teach people. So if you're interested, just reach out. All right, that's it. Thank you.
That is so insightful. Sheena just reminded us that modern front-end work doesn't have to be complex. With HTMX and AlpineJS, HTML itself can do the magic. This session wasn't only about tools. It was about rethinking how we approach the craft of web development. Remember that simplicity can drive speed, clarity, and joy in development. And for the record, I've discovered and built my first app with HTMX and AlpineJS a few months ago, thanks to Sheena. So you too should give it a try. Let's give a big thank you to Sheena for showing us a new path to front-end design. And thank you all for carrying forward the energy of PyLadies Con 2025.